Good evening or good morning, depending on where you are in the world, as this is a 5 hard-hitting webinars that's being broadcast throughout the world. Today we look at a question that's not that easy to answer. After over 200 years, we still have no disease-modifying drugs for people like me with 17 years of Parkinson's. Is anybody out there? Does anybody care? How can we be heard? And if we are heard, will they do anything about it? Lots to talk about tonight. My name is Alexander Reed, and this transmission is coming from the web center of the European Parkinson Therapy Center in Italy, of which I'm a director. The European Center works with clients from over 45 countries to help people with Parkinson's rebuild their lives and get the best therapy after being diagnosed with Parkinson's. Every week we will pass the control and discussion of the webinar over to leading names from the Parkinson world. This week we're pleased to have Larry Gifford from PD Avengers. Thank you, Larry, whose list of titles and achievements is too long for me to tell you. I'll let him explain that, and he will introduce his guests. For details of other webinars in the series, do just visit parkinsontherapy.com/web. You can see lots of other worldwide webinars with some great personalities, big names, big questions, and a lot of avoiding the answer, to be honest. If you want to ask questions, just type them into the YouTube chat and we will forward them on to Larry through our own internal chat system. So a warm welcome to Larry and his guests. I notice you have two female guests.
I do. They are.
Last week I had mainly men, so you obviously know something more than I do.
I always invite people that are smarter than I am to the table to have a good conversation. And so I thank you, Alex, for hosting and for all the great work that you're doing. And these webinars are really terrific. We really appreciate it. Karen Lee from the Parkinson's Canada. She is the CEO and president, and Karlin Schroeder. She is the associate vice president of community engagement for Parkinson's Foundation. They have diverse backgrounds to help us tackle these issues that we want to talk about today. Parkinson's is the fastest growing brain disease in the world. It's every 2.5 minutes somebody in the world dies from Parkinson's disease. We are, we've been around for, the disease has been known for 205 years. We have a non-disease altering drug, but a symptom, the gold standard drug, Incinemet, that's over 50 years old. And there's a lot of the community that feels like there's not the urgency that other diseases get when it comes to science, to research, to government funding, policy changes, and even broad education campaigns to the public. So we're going to get into that today as best we can and figure out what's standing in our way, what can we learn from others that have done this in whether it's other diseases or other campaigns for advocacy, and see what we can do to maybe move some of those rocks out of the way and start getting our fair share of the attention and the money and the disease-altering medications. So, Karlin, let's start with you. Why don't you, beyond your title, can you give us a little background into the types of activities you've been involved in throughout your career?
Sure, happy to do that, Larry. Thanks for having me here today as well. I have been working in the health advocacy space for over 20 years now. I come from a background in women's health and international health, and really the thread that ties everything I've done together to the present day, where I help ensure that people with Parkinson's have a seat at the research table is really bridging that relationship between healthcare providers or researchers and community members, and ensuring that community members are helping to drive the care and research that they need. So I like to think that I bring a global perspective to the point of the Avengers, but also think local, and excited to talk more about the topics that you mentioned today.
Great. And Karen, you're coming up on your third anniversary as the president of Parkinson Canada, but you've had a brilliant career before that. Can you talk about that some?
Sure. Thanks, Larry. And nice to see you too, Karlin. And yeah, happy to be here today. My background is I'm a neuroscientist. That was my training. And I really saw that there was a bridge that needed to be built between what was being done in the lab and being able to communicate that to the patient group that you were doing the research for. And my background is in multiple sclerosis. I did my PhD with an MS spin, and I spent 12 years at the MS Society of Canada leading their research portfolio. And it was there that really had the opportunity to grow patient communication when it comes to research, patient engagement. And in the last 3 years, have the privilege of leading Parkinson Canada. And you were asking a really interesting question, like, what do you do in your day to day? It's multiple things, but I think the big thing for me is to really push the organization to ensure that we're centering all our work around people living with Parkinson's. So I think that would be the main piece here for myself.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Now we're going to approach this theme again, like I said, from different perspectives, including advocacy, research. We're not just willing participants, grateful of we want to be part of it. We want to be partners, and wellness and stigma. But let's establish the current status quo of the voice of Parkinson's, based on your own experiences and what you observed today. What's the share of the Parkinson's voice like in the world right now compared to whether it's other diseases or other advocacy organizations?
I'll start off, having been in another neurological disease space. I would say it is smaller than other disease states, as we think about more recently a lot of conversation about Alzheimer's, and where things are going there. And obviously you always have cancer, heart disease are at the forefront because of sheer numbers. Right. So I would say it doesn't have as big of a space, but that doesn't mean it can't. And I think that's really what the conversation is going to be about today.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Karlin, what do you see?
Yeah, well, so I've been with the foundation for 12 years. So I've been in the Parkinson space for a while now. And I do agree that we do have, unfortunately, a smaller share of the conversation at the table, but I'm encouraged because if I look at 12 years ago where we started and where we are today, I do see that growing. The louder voices of people with young onset Parkinson's, the global voices that are coming to the table, like thinking about Omotola Thomas out there doing work in Africa. So I think that there's definitely a growth, but we want to make that growth exponential and meteoric. And I know that's part of what we're talking about today. Sorry, I'll just add the last thing I'll add is certainly, to acknowledge what Karen said, certainly our work is based on the models of HIV/AIDS and breast cancer and how they raise their voices to get more attention.
Well, that's great. And you mentioned Omotola. We should mention that she was supposed to be here, but she fell ill. But we'll get into the stigma of Parkinson's and on her behalf, because that's a big issue in the African nations, I know. As I look at, and I've had Parkinson's just over 5 years now, and it's really hard to get the attention of not just the Parkinson's community and the Parkinson's doctors and scientists, researchers, and GPs, the medical community. It's also hard to get the general public's attention because there's so many messages coming at them in so many ways. And one of the things that the PD Avengers is trying to do is bring all these organizations together, tear down some of the walls, so we can find ways to communicate either the same message or similar messages at the same time, so the message gets louder around the world. And we've seen some success in that, but again, it's, we've been around 2.5 years. We've got 6,000 individual members from 92 countries. We have 120 organizations worldwide that are working together, that have agreed to work together. But what is standing in our way from being heard by just the general population, or being able to get on, unless you're Michael J. Fox, we're not seeing this on the Today Show or Good Morning America. Like, how do we get our messages out there? What do you see standing in our way, just at this point?
Go for it, Karlin. You go first.
Okay. Well, I feel like I'm answering the question a little bit sideways, maybe, and it's not because I'm trying to avoid it. It's because I'm formulating the thought around it a little bit more. And maybe this is less of a direct barrier and more of a way of thinking about how to get the word out more. And again, I kind of go back to that idea of like, how do we join in with other disease communities where we fit, maybe that could help to elevate our voice in a collaborative way? And I wonder if that's a piece of it. So if we think about neurodegenerative diseases, and again, the big piece of the pie that Alzheimer's gets, can we add a Parkinson's narrative to that? We're all, potentially in these disease spaces having experiences of dementia, and those are things, shared stories we can tell. So I wonder if there's a collaborative way to help elevate the voice. I'm also thinking about diseases of aging for the part of the Parkinson's population that's older, tying that in with, heart disease and other things that come up, and being able to elevate our voice that way. And I know that's a way of getting more funding for Parkinson's, is to go through the National Institutes of Aging in the US, and approaching, funding by looking at Lewy body dementia with Parkinson's and getting money that way. So is it a way for us to get a bigger piece of the pie? I haven't really answered your question on, I guess, more of a public message and a public voice of blasting that out. I don't know, Karen, if you have some thoughts on that.
It's funny. And if I may, Larry, refer back to before we joined, you said, this is really about a conversation. And I think I don't have an answer really to what you're asking, but, I think there's multiple things playing into this. What I've observed, or what I've seen in the last 2.5 years, is one, Parkinson's is a variable disease, or is it diseases? I think that's still up for debate. It impacts people very differently. However, I think I know my first few months, what I was being told or what I was reading was very much of what you would think Parkinson's was, is like this older disease, right? And I look at Larry, you're not old.
Thank you.
And, and so there's all that, there's a spectrum happening here. And so I'm also wondering, is it because the community is getting so many different messages? It's so many different things. And when you think about, Larry, what PD Avengers is trying to do, you're saying you have all this membership, but what's that one message we want to actually get out there? And I don't even know if we know, because we recently were at a meeting, Karlin and I got to meet Karlin in person, and at a meeting where we still need to define Parkinson's. I mean, we can explain it, like we say it's a neurological disease, it affects motor function, there's non-motor, but what is Parkinson's disease? And I think even that is not clear. And so if we don't even have that from a research standpoint, it's very tricky too. So I feel like there's a lot of mixed messages that are going out right now, but that's, yeah.
And there's people that are, sorry, Karlin, I'll get right back to you. There is the community that wants to focus on ending Parkinson's disease. There's the community that wants to focus on living their best life now. Mm-hmm. There's the people that want to talk about prevention and research, and then there's this a lot of people with Parkinson's don't want to talk about it at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Larry, I'll add another dimension to that I thought of as Karen was speaking, is the potential invisibility at times of Parkinson's too, right? It seems like it can sometimes be super visible, and that's where the stigma may come in, and those components that we want to talk about when people have dyskinesias or really obvious tremors or freezing of gait. But I think maybe for newly diagnosed people, this is what I hear from the community or see with my friends with Parkinson's. If you're newly diagnosed, or if you're just out there when you're on and you're really on, it can be invisible. Mm-hmm. And that may be a part of the barrier too, is that, people assume there is no disability there, or if you're older, that it's just slowing down. And so I think having that diverse representation of Parkinson's, which we see coming out in, drawings that look different than the classic stooped older man and things like that. That may be important too, so that people know that what they're seeing is Parkinson's when they do see it.
It's actually interesting because there's a lot of parallels with Parkinson's with multiple sclerosis as well. So MS being a neurodegenerative disease, it's also many invisible, not visible symptoms, and no physical, some people you never even know that they have MS. So I always try to figure out and try to understand, why has MS been able to be a unified, loud voice? When I was in the space, I started off over 20 some years ago. There was one disease modifying therapy. They have 15 now, to the point they're now really talking about personalization of medication. So how was it? And I'm always asking people who are, how is it that MS has been able to do that? And I feel like we're on the brink for Parkinson's. I think it is possible. And, but, similar symptoms, it's invisible. People don't necessarily want to come out, but why is there a louder voice there?
Yeah, and you were there when that loud voice happened.
Yes, I was. So loud voices can be good or bad, right?
Right, but what do you think was the catalyst? What took you from just being MS to suddenly getting more government funding than other diseases that have more patients than MS?
Right, and interestingly here, Larry, in Canada, we say there's 100,000 people who live with MS. There's 100,000 people who live with Parkinson's. And at the MS Society, in Canada, it's about a $50 million organization. We're about a 10 to 12 here at Parkinson Canada.
Yeah.
So why? And there's a few things, I think, from a business standpoint, I will say. Marketing awareness is something that is important, that I know the team and I here at Parkinson Canada are really trying to look at that, to be clear in our messaging and marketing of, I have to say, I don't want to use the word marketing, but it is a marketing piece from a Parkinson Canada standpoint to build that awareness. And when I talk to, researchers and others in the community, they're like, well, because MS impacts people at the prime of their lives. I'm like, but Larry's in the prime of his life, right? And it's that shift in the conversation, I think, that we also have to make very apparent. And that it impacts people, not just in retirement age, but also in their prime of their lives. So I think there needs to be a shift in conversation, how we talk about Parkinson's. And I think that imagery, Karlin, we were chatting about earlier, that you said, is like, it's no longer, somebody who is 80 and in a long-term care facility. There's people who are working in their prime and very successfully who live with Parkinson's. So there's multiple factors there as well. But for me, at Parkinson Canada, really trying to build that brand awareness, which then brings along the awareness for people living with Parkinson's.
Let me ask you this, Karen. When MS started to get that money, started to get the notoriety, what was it? Patient driven? Was it organization driven? Was it collaboration? What was it?
I think it's all of that. But I think the organization also needs to play a key role. So interestingly, I think one thing that I've also seen, so we have 15 disease-modifying therapies in MS right now, but there was another form of multiple sclerosis that had no therapies. And people who lived with that disease, it's called primary progressive MS, felt really left behind, because here we are, like tons of drugs happening for the relapsing remitting for. So how are we going to move the needle there? And how that happened was the MS societies all came together and created an alliance. And this alliance pushed on health regulators, so the EMA, the FDA, to really talk about what were the barriers scientifically, but also for treatments for DMTs. And it was removing those barriers, as I know PD Avengers were doing, but it was very specific. It was about finding a disease-modifying therapy for primary progressive MS. And it's a model that I think works very well. And the alliance is still going. They just happened to be in Toronto, a few of them, and I've been having the opportunity to connect with them this week. And, I think a few of us have started talking in the Parkinson's community of the different societies and groups coming together. Karlin was just at a meeting last month now, where it was Parkinson Canada, Parkinson UK, Michael J. Fox Foundation. Karlin represented Parkinson Foundation. Then we had Cure Parkinson's Trust there, CPP. We're all working towards the same goal. And I think that's the key thing at the end of the day is there's no egos in this. It's for people living with Parkinson's. And I think if we can focus on one thing at a time, I think that might maybe help progress things in terms of that awareness and voice versus I know there's so many things we can be working on, but sometimes just picking one priority and going in for that might make a difference.
Karlin, you've been there 12 years. Have you seen a change in the collaboration between the organizations?
Yeah, I think, our even legacy organization to where we are now was always trying to do things collaboratively, but I think we do see more and more collaboration, whether it's within U.S. organizations and the policy work we do with the Fox Foundation, or whether it's globally, as Karen just noted, in this convening that we had a few weeks ago. So I do think there's a movement very much in that direction. And again, with Avengers kind of bringing everybody, sorry about that, I just dropped something that might have been loud.
No, that's fine.
With everybody, bringing everybody together in one space that is patient driven. And I think just to go back to that, I don't think this is an either or, I think it's an and. We need, the community groups, but from the patient perspective, if we do look historically at these models in the US that are put up again and again, it was the HIV/AIDS community, it was people living with HIV who really forced the changes at, in this case, FDA, to get therapies on the market more quickly for them. And it required, I think, an intense amount of vulnerability to be out there with the disease, especially such a stigmatizing disease, and probably a lot of support from people I can only imagine, care partners and the early organizations in the US like ACT UP and different orgs like that, to really be on the steps of the FDA demanding change. And I think, from us, it was HIV/AIDS, breast cancer, and they're the ones who taught us, and we try to then go on and teach other people. But even with breast cancer, I think you see the same thing, women doing photo shoots of their mastectomy scars, prominent writers like Susan Sontag talking about this process of living with breast cancer. So I think that I don't know if it's fair or not to have all of that on the patient community. I don't even know if that's the right word, because people living with diseases should be the voices that are most heard. But I can see that it requires a lot to do that, and to really be vulnerable to go out there and do that. And you're living with apathy or other aspects of Parkinson's, having the resources and support to be able to do that could be important as well.
Yeah, yes. Sure. Hang on. Let's see here. I don't know how to lower the audio settings. It's pretty low as it is. Let's see. Let's try this. So you can hear me coming back at you? Okay. Let's see here. How's that? Is that better? Okay, let me try something else. Is that better? Testing 1, 2. There you go. Okay. Let's keep going. So recently, I've seen some really interesting public service announcements from Parkinson France and from Parkinson's UK that have shown sort of the dark sides of Parkinson's. And which I think are great because it captures people's attention outside of the Parkinson's community, but then the Parkinson's community had a negative reaction to it because they want the positive message. Is there that internal conflict of having multiple audiences can be difficult. So how do you maneuver through that?
Larry, it's
But
interesting.
Karen, you put Karen Lee in a leather jacket against a brick wall, and she looks awesome.
Well, thank you. I'll try that next time. But it's interesting because we just had this conversation where we were putting out a campaign and we want to be hopeful. And we got feedback that it was too, I want to show the realities of Parkinson's, but we've done that too. And you know what it is at the end of the day, I think, Larry, if the messaging, whatever it might be, hopeful or real, in the sense of what it lives, the darker side of, or, when people are, the difficulties of Parkinson's, if there's a conversation, that's what matters, regardless if it's a hopeful message or a message of realities. And if you can have that, and it's not always one way or the other, but invoke a conversation with the audience, that's technically also, I think, a success piece. So I don't think there's a right answer, but I also don't think it's bad if it causes debate.
Karlin, you said you've learned from the AIDS community and from breast cancer. What specifically are you guys implementing at the Parkinson Foundation that stems from those causes?
Yeah, that's really where our patient engagement and research program came from. And I want to give full credit here to the National Breast Cancer Coalition project lead, who really taught us how to do the work that we do. What we're doing specifically is working with people with Parkinson's and care partners who've said, I want to know more about research. I want to know the details. I want to be able to sit at the table with a researcher and really drive and shape what is done. And look, there's people with Parkinson's who worked in biopharma and biotech. They know this cold. Everybody's at a different level, but a way to respond to people's ask, to have a level of knowledge and confidence where they felt that they could know the science, but also bring their lived experience of Parkinson's, because that's the core expertise everybody with Parkinson's holds. Only you living with Parkinson's know what that's like and can share that. And that has all the value in the world in and of itself. But responding to that request, training people with Parkinson's and their care partners in the US, over 400 people now, in depth in what is research, what's in the Parkinson's pipeline, how do I think about ethics, and then helping to set up those relationships with industry, so pharma companies, med tech, devices, government here in the US, the Department of Defense and FDA and NIH, and then academic centers, to really sit down and be able to say, this is the research we think needs to be done. This is how you should spend your research money. I'm going to design a study with you and talk about what's meaningful change in my life. Do I want 3 hours more on time? Do I want to be able to go to a birthday party with my grandkids? And what does that mean? That I can still drive my car? And how do we translate that to an endpoint in the study? All those aspects of it, to disseminating results back to the community. So really, again, the work that we've learned from these communities is that our role is not to be the voice of the community, it's to be a pathway for the voice of the community in these partnerships. And I think that one of the challenges we see, and then I'll stop there because I could say a lot about this, is that for research communities, this can be a new concept. It's a paradigm shift. It's letting somebody else have power at what feels like maybe your table. And I think so many researchers have embraced this, and I could name people who are just champions in the space, so I don't want to imply otherwise. But it is a skill set to learn how to hand over that power and to talk to communities about where they think research should go. And that's another role we play, is preparing researchers to really know how to do that constructively. So you're not just rubber stamping, you're not just saying, hey, I have a research idea, community, check yes or no, is it good? But you're saying, help me figure out the research I should be pursuing.
Yeah, having people with Parkinson's at the starting gate of Parkinson's projects, I think, is really key. In just getting the full buy-in of the community. It's for us, so we have being there at the through the entire process, instead of just as willing and grateful participants. We want to be partners, and I think that's really key. We have a one of our audience members saying, unfortunately, the celebrity-driven campaigns seem to be what helps the most, and the groups with more big celebrity endorsements get the eyeballs on them. Have you seen that to be the case?
Karen, you want to jump in?
Well, I think when you have a celebrity, obviously their reach is way more than. I mean, look, if we were to look at the three of us, Larry is our celebrity here, and he's going to have more of a reach between Karlin and I. And I think it's a piece where, as long as you're bringing a voice and awareness to the disease, that's one big step already. And I think that is what we got to embrace, if there is that, awareness from a celebrity. And then it's up to, I think, the rest of us to say, what are we going to do with that piece, right? That one message that I think is still very mixed right now, when we talked about all the different things we can be talking about, and being very clear what a priority is that we're trying to put out there, or the message that we want to put out there.
And I think for me, overall, right, there is that benefit, as we said, of celebrity voices, because they do draw attention to the cause. What we're trying to do at the foundation is present a more robust picture of all people with Parkinson's. And that can be just, a normal part of the process when there's one or two big names that piece of Parkinson's is what people are most familiar with. And when we think about, things I know all of our groups are thinking about, whether it's diversity, equity, and inclusion in the different faces of Parkinson's, or people who experience it more from maybe the darker side versus the lighter side, we're really trying to make sure that all of those voices are represented. And that does lead to the challenge then of how different everybody is with the disease and what is our one unified message. But I think we just want to be sure that a full picture is painted of Parkinson's and what the different experiences can be.
Yeah, because talking from a person with a lived experience of Parkinson's, the motor symptoms are the least bothersome for me. It's the symptoms internal, all the mood changes and the depression and the anxiety and the pain and those are the things that you can't. It's hard to demonstrate in an ad campaign. And so if you, like you were saying earlier, Karlin, it's the invisible disease. This is a full body disease, but people still consider it the tremor disease. And not even everybody with Parkinson's gets a tremor. And so, and understanding what the disease is, Karen, like you said before, we don't know how we get it. We don't know how to get rid of it. We don't know what it is really when it comes down to it, or we have some ideas, we have some targets that we're looking at, but we still don't know for sure if the alpha-synuclein is the answer, or if it's going to be mitochondria. We're going to recharge those cell batteries. Well, what's going to be the end game? Is it the gut bacteria, microbiome? There's so many great targets, but boy, it's hard. And I think, is it too complicated to hone it down for people to really grasp it? It's one thing to say, I've got cancer, but when you say you have Parkinson's, even when people are diagnosed, they go, oh, the Michael J. Fox disease or the Muhammad Ali disease, but I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know if I was going to die.
I wonder, Larry, if there's like a metaphor in here, a way to message this that could work to capture all of this, right? You think about a flower is a flower, right? Everybody knows what a flower is, but there's thousands of kinds of flowers, and some of them grow tall and some small, and some their seeds out this way. I don't know. I'm a biology nerd, so I could go on and on about this particular metaphor. But is there a metaphor where there's a core message, right, about Parkinson's that we want the public to know, and about why it's urgent and how we should drive change? But then there's kind of riffs on that. And I'm not a marketing person, so it could be a terrible idea, but I wonder if there's some way to do that, because I do think that the core message helps. It's a unified message. It's a drumbeat that we can put our voice on. But to the points we're all making here, we don't want to lose that. Part of the complexity of solving our disease area, is that it is so different. And people need to know that too. So that's kind of my conceptualization of maybe a way to get at that.
I've heard it recently compared to a city. And so, like, you have your and you'll know this, Karen, the part of the cell that takes out the trash. I forget what it's called.
Part of the cell.
Lysosomes?
Yeah, I was going to say, are you being that specific, Larry? Lysosomes.
So lysosomes are where the trash goes in your cell, and they don't. If you have Parkinson's, your trash doesn't get picked up. And if your trash doesn't get picked up on your street one week, it's horrible. It just happened to me last week. Everything piles up, and you start getting flies, and other things shut down. And the kitchen, we've got cartons of empty juice bottles and stuff because they haven't taken out the recycling from before. And so everything backs up on itself, and that's kind of what happens in Parkinson's. Is all these systems are like part of a city. So if you've got the trash, the trash men, or you've got the people that are telling you which way to go on the street, go here, stop here. All these elements in our brain are part of a city. And so when parts of a city shut down, it kind of collapses the other parts of the city. So we don't know which is causing which yet, but like if the police stop arresting people for speeding in your city or shooting people, things are going to go wrong quick. And so the same thing happens in your brain with Parkinson's. And so, but that type of metaphor, I think, done by somebody more elegant than me, could be effective.
Yeah, I think it can be, because if I were to go back to my MS days and how we described MS from a biological sense in a way that people could understand, we would say, you think of an electrical cord and you have the insulation, and that allows electricity to basically run, so your light bulb can turn on. That insulation is missing, so electricity can't carry that current. So basically in your body, the brain isn't transmitting information to your hands and legs and so forth, and impairs movement. I'm trying to understand and just thinking about how have we been describing Parkinson's beyond just it's a non-motor symptoms, motor symptoms. Is there an analogy that people are using? I haven't really seen it readily. Where
like
a lot
slow motion lobotomy.
Okay. Even then, right? Like people are like, you almost have to use, as I think Karlin, like whether it's flowers or something people can understand. When I understand what it is, that's when the grasping of information goes. And even from a research side, we were talking about that recently. And I know, Karlin, you were talking about engaging patients. Research can be very abstract. When you're able to explain it, that's when people can get in and like, yeah, I can be part of this. And it's being able to have, once again, it's being able to communicate in a way that people understand. And I think right now we have a lot of messages. And if we can unify on one message or explain Parkinson's in one way that also we can visualize, that is helpful, I think that will make a lot of strides for us as a community.
Do you think it's possible for these groups to all come together for one message?
I think anything is possible.
Oh, look, I love that, Karen.
I really do. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen in the MS space. I know it can happen here too. And I think we're starting to see a lot, as Karlin said, you've been here in this space for some time now. You've seen unification within your community. And I think I was very impressed what I saw last month, where we had various groups come together. I have yet to experience WPC. I know there's a lot of information that floats around there, but we do come together. It's not that we don't come together. I think we can come together, but if we can unify ourselves with one voice, I think it will be very strong.
Karlin, what do you think?
I agree. I definitely think that it's possible. Absolutely. And I think I see the community moving more and more towards ways to work together. So I do think that's a direction we're headed.
Okay, so how do I help make that happen?
How do you, or how does everybody?
Anybody, right? And me or anybody.
I'll be honest, from our lens here at Parkinson Canada, we have a theme that is very strong now in our strategic plan. It's collaboration, partnership. regardless of who you are. We try to partner with everyone, as long as it's moving the needle for people living with Parkinson's. I think during COVID has really highlighted there's no need for silos. There's no need for barriers. I think Canadians know, I just want to highlight, it's the first time we brought the Every Victory Counts manual to Canada and Canadianized it. Before that, I think we were like, oh, it's a barrier because we have a border. It's a different organization. I will put it out there. We're really looking to partner with people who've done great stuff. We've been talking to Karlin at Parkinson Foundation about what they do on the research engagement. We modeled their patient advisory council, working with Michael J. Fox Foundation on endpoints as well with Parkinson UK. For me, it's really about taking the good of what everyone's doing and partnering together and not having to feel like we own one thing. I think carrying that mantra, for me at least, and for the organization Parkinson Canada, is very important. And I think that's how we can at least help in this unification of messaging.
Okay.
I will stick with my theme of patient engagement, but from a slightly different angle. When we think about the principles of patient engagement, it's transparent, bi-directional communication, right? So if we apply that to all of our organizations and our missions, if we are transparent and we are all multiply, it's a web, right? And the information's going every which way on that web and we're sharing it. I think, that goes a long way towards building relationships between organizations. And that takes also a leap of faith. It takes courage to be really transparent about what you're doing and what your goals are and share information. Spaces, when you think about academic spaces and, the competition to race to be the first publication, this is a fact of what happens, but I think that's a tenet we can take from patient engagement that's really important. I think, disseminating information is really important. And then I think too, if the community comes together, and then this I specifically mean people with Parkinson's and care partners, and says, this is what we want, we're not going to do any of this other stuff, this is what we want, and this is what we expect, that is going to drive change. I don't know if I can articulate a really good example of how to do that, right, at this exact moment. But I've heard people say things, for example, like, we're going to rank clinical trials. And we're going to say, these are the ones the community thinks is most important, and were co-designed by the community, and those are the ones we should talk about. And these other ones that were really badly designed because nobody asked us, we're not going to talk about those. There's an idea of how we could really leverage change and funnel. We're funneling people into participating in the studies that are most important to the community. So that would be maybe one example of how something like that could be executed if we think about it on a grander global scale for a unified message.
Yeah, and so is it? It kind of reminds me of like being in Congress, where you have to sort of behind the scenes be negotiating deals. From an organizational standpoint, having the organizations come together sort of in the background, while in the forefront, the people with Parkinson's are campaigning. It reminds me, that's what was happening during the AIDS epidemic as well, where there was all these great, they were putting condoms over Jesse Helms' house, and they were dumping ashes of their loved ones in the front of the White House, and they were campaigning in front of the FDA, but all the while there was members of the AIDS community meeting with Fauci, and they were working on a cocktail for 6 years while all that stuff was going on during that time. So it's kind of the simultaneous, multi discipline approach that we're going to have to figure out how to do. How much of a role does stigma play, and how involved people with Parkinson's want to be public about and tell their stories? Because I think storytelling is really important. But how do we get past some of the stigma associated with the diagnosis?
Yeah, I think this is a really challenging area. We do see this with this community of people with Parkinson's. We engage, especially as their disease progresses, although I can imagine it could be at any stage. Thinking about a situation recently where somebody I was working with had to publicly be in a wheelchair for the first time, and was really uncomfortable with that. And then like to see it in action of this person being wheeled up to a counter, so the person in the counter can't necessarily make eye contact easily with the person in the wheelchair, and then they're talking like that person isn't there. And that was who the discussion was for. So really seeing why that stigma is a true concern to people. People do get treated differently. So I think that is a real challenge. I think one thing that we've tried to do is have people who've found ways to move past the stigma, do peer-to-peer mentorship on that, publicly speak on that. I can think of another person, and I'll avoid naming names because I don't know, how they want to share their own message. I don't want to be their spokesman. But thinking about another person who really has a lot of cognitive impairment and still has insight into that cognitive impairment and still can very much engage with cognitive impairment. Just because you're cognitively impaired doesn't mean you can't have a voice anymore. And she's able to tell that story publicly. This is what I live with. This is what my struggle looks like. Yeah, it can be embarrassing. Here's how I deal with the embarrassing moments. Here's tips you can use. I think, how can we support and elevate those people who are able to talk about the stigma? And I don't think anybody should be forced to talk about something they're not ready or comfortable with, but for those who can, maybe that peer-to-peer messaging is important to get out there. And I think, like us as people who don't have Parkinson's, just normalizing things. When we have meetings, we always say, look, stand up, move around, let your medication timer go off, like whatever you need to do to be successful in this meeting, it doesn't matter. And I actually am not comfortable sitting for long periods of time anyway, so I'll be the first person to stand up. And then people after me will stand up. It normalizes it. It makes somebody feel comfortable to do it. Somebody's alarm is going off endlessly. We just ignore it and we keep the meeting going. We know that person's trying to get their medications out and turn their phone off. So do you think there's just a component of that as well, of just making it be like, yep, this is what it looks like, and here's how we move forward with that is important too.
Karen, did you want to add to that?
I think it's also the roles we can play, as Karlin said, working with those who are feeling comfortable about talking about stigma, but also building that awareness. It's all about awareness to the general public so that people can understand what Parkinson's disease is. There's been so many times now I've heard in my last couple of years here of, I did not want to share with my employers that I was diagnosed or lived with the disease. Really fearful of what that might mean, or to my community because they don't understand. So I think obviously peer-to-peer is really important, but I really believe we also have a big role to play in building awareness of the disease. I'm going to use the tagline, what's still possible, even though you're diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
That was a great campaign that you have going on there. What's still possible? I especially like the guy that you featured on Giving Tuesday.
He's not bad, hey? His better half, amazing.
We do want to say hello to Renato and to Nina, who are checking in. And Nina's saying Karen is right. We have to be more specific. And we do. And when I think of stigma, we oftentimes think of our own personal space. But like if you go to the continent of Africa and you go to the country of Uganda, where if you have Parkinson's, you're considered to be cursed by a witch. There's a lot of different types of stigma around the world. And so that's hard to manage messaging globally when the experience of Parkinson's, diagnosis, treatment, the community education is so vastly different. They don't even, there's a third of the world that has no access to levodopa. That's a problem. So it's hard to know where to begin and what to focus on.
I think you've hit it on the nail. There's so much. And sometimes we might have to take a step back and look at it all. We've actually, I have to say, we've also progressed from my understanding, and Karlin, you've highlighted in the last 10 years as well, is that steps have not been made. But maybe we do have to take a step back, because now as the world has opened up, we can see where different, as we said, in Africa, there's a whole understanding or misunderstanding of what Parkinson's disease is, the affordability of drugs. I think we do just have to rally around one message, and what is that? Because right now, I think there is so many different things happening that I don't want to say the message is being spread thin, but I would say we're trying to insert wherever we can. And I think that's where things are not clear.
Why do diseases that impact fewer people tend to get more attention? Is it? Let me just put a caveat. Is Parkinson's overlooked because it's not apparently deadly? Like, it's not as severe as other diseases. It's not as, life altering or seemingly life altering.
That's an interesting question, Larry. It's not something I really had thought of before. I guess I would say, if I talk to a handful of people about Parkinson's, yeah, nobody's like, oh man, you die from that and it's horrible, right? People don't know. People don't know the long arc of the disease and all the non-motor symptoms people live with. So that may be part of it. And that's not something I thought of. I do think too, in America, I personally believe, we don't value our older community. People are put in nursing homes. There is some indication that that's moving back, and more community-based care is moving back. But our older communities in nursing homes, hidden away, people do not see what happens to those communities. We don't. You can tug the heartstrings of children with cancer, and that's awful, and you should. So I'm not trying to pit one against the other, or say that one thing is not gravely serious and devastating, maybe, but there's things that pull our heartstrings. And in the United States, we don't have videos of somebody's grandmother, dealing with Parkinson's per se, outside of maybe drug ads. So I think there's probably a lot of factors here, but I hadn't really thought about, if people think of Parkinson's as a deadly disease or not. And I think that could be part of it.
Well, in the U.S., I know that it's the 17th leading cause of death in America every year. And people think that it's not deadly. I know, Karen, MS and Parkinson's have the highest rates per capita in Canada than any other country in the world.
Yeah. And we don't die from MS either, similar to Parkinson's. And why is it that there's way more awareness of MS over Parkinson's? There's probably different reasons for that. But I think what's important now as we move forward. I mean, we could always look back and say why maybe this didn't happen, but I'm going to go back to this whole concept of collaboration. I think collaboration is going to be key in unifying a voice.
I'd like to bring one other thing forward here that we touched on a bit, but also when I think about the work we've done at the foundation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, thinking about that, like, we really don't know the experience of Parkinson's in many communities. And you could think about it from race and ethnicity, which is where our work has centered right now, Black and African American, Hispanic, and American Indian communities. But obviously there's LGBTQ and so many other, and those intersect. So I don't want to, again, imply that they don't. But when I think about that, there's so little we know about the communities we're working in and their experience of Parkinson's and how that ranks in the order of diseases they're dealing with and priorities that they're dealing with. And what we've heard from those communities in listening sessions is that there is also still a different perspective where, again, grandma or grandpa's aging, it's normal to slow down, or, oh my God, I've got heart disease and diabetes, and I know how deadly those are because the message is out there and that's what I'm worried about. Or if I have to decide where to spend my money, those are the meds I buy. So I do think there's an educational component to this too, and a greater need to bring in this broader community to really be able to make Parkinson's more visible, because I think in some communities, we haven't done the work we need to do to ensure that those communities have the resources and tools that they need to fully be able to address their Parkinson's in the way that they would want to.
Yeah, that's very, very well said. Thank you. I'm going to bring Alex Reed back in to join us for the last 4 minutes. I think he has some questions for us that he wants to drill down deep on. This is such an interesting conversation, and hopefully it's just the start of conversations to come that we can have with other organizations and really begin to hone in on this one message idea, because I think that's going to be really important. Alex, welcome back to your show.
Been fascinating, Larry, and thank you so much. It's really, really interesting. I did want to add just a European perspective, if I may, you being all from the North American side. We see over thousands of people per year who come to our center. Our center is designed to give them back their movement, working with Becky Farley, and also to give them back their will to live. I'll be honest with you, that is a thing which seems to be, well, in a research they did, the Parkinson Outcomes Project, they asked what destroys the quality of life of a person with Parkinson's. The answer was not Parkinson's, it was anxiety, fear, depression, and apathy. I have 17 years of Parkinson's, and I can tell you there are moments when you kind of like saying, this is getting a bit tough. I got what you said earlier, that people don't realize that Parkinson, or they do realize that Parkinson doesn't kill you. It does make you much more susceptible to getting diseases which will kill you. So I wouldn't write it off. And it does get much more difficult as time goes by. I just asked Michael J. Fox. I think also Larry put his finger on it. There are those who are looking to live better. There are those looking to end Parkinson's. And then there are those who haven't a clue what's going on, which is probably the majority. I have to say that Simon Stott, in a previous webinar, said that 80% of the research done on Parkinson has been done in the last 20 years. And we did a television interview on British television. I did add very quickly, Simon, the other 180 years before that, what were you doing?
There was a trickle out of a fire hose of research, and now it's like they've opened up a fire hydrant.
I think the biggest thing that people here who come here, we get people from 45 countries, remember? So we've got a lot of variety. Australia as well, Venezuela. Most of them are just sick and tired of hearing about the latest discoveries from mice or rats, or this could be an interesting pathway. And then the only medicine that's come out in the last 5 years is Agentis or Picapone. So there's not a lot of trust in the Parkinson community that the pharmaceutical community is listening. And I hope Parkinson Europe, with their new structure, will take that on. And I hope PD Avengers will be a voice of reason with the pharmaceutical industry. Personally, I don't see in my lifetime something that will cure. And I think it was Karen or Karlin said earlier, Parkinson's is not one disease. Michel who was the president of the Oxford Parkinson Disease Research Centre, said Parkinson's is actually 50 or 60 different combinations of diseases that have dopamine in common. So you can call them Parkinson's, but everyone develops it in a different way. And a very good friend of mine got a cognitive form of Parkinson's, and that wasn't funny. She went downhill very fast. Parkinson's is a difficult disease to live with. And I cannot for the life of me think why people can't understand that it destroys families, it destroys people's lives. Sometimes for no reason, because we give up, because it's a psychological condition as well. We don't think we can do very much because we've got Parkinson's, which is not true. We can. And, but it is a very devastating disease. And I'm amazed that there is not more cooperation between FDA and EMA. There are drugs available in America which are not available here in Europe.
Same in Canada.
you know, Imbresia and the likes.
Right.
It's very frustrating for a person with Parkinson, and we're very, very pleased to know that there are people like Larry. He certainly gets it when he's got it.
I'll tell you, Alex, this is somebody's got to wake up the community and say we need to march this direction. Whether that's me or somebody else, I'm happy to do it if that's the role I need to play. But more than anything, I want to connect people. I want people to realize that they can talk to each other. These walls that we seemingly have built, they're fake. We built them. We can take them down, and we can do this together. It's important that we do it together. If we are a community, then we need to have a community plan. Just like if we were building, a residential community, you don't just start building houses willy-nilly. You got to have a plan, and so we need to figure out what that plan is, and then just put it to work. I'm so grateful for you giving us this platform, Alex. And I'm thankful to Karlin and Karen for their time and their expertise and for being leaders in this space. I know you guys are doing wonderful work, and you have done wonderful work, and you guys get it at the highest level. And I hope others take note.
Thank you, Larry and Alex, and for giving us the opportunity to speak, to have this conversation, and as Alex said, Larry, for really being a community leader. We all look up to you, Larry, and really appreciate all the work that you've been doing for the PD community worldwide.
Thank you.
Karen said it all. I'll just say thank you. Thank you for letting me join this discussion today. I really appreciate it.
All right, Alex, back to you.
I would echo that. You two have been fantastic. Thank you so much for your input. Larry is Larry. He is a rock and a pillar in the PD world. And I'm very grateful for your input tonight, Larry. Thank you for hosting this webinar. I hope we can do some more together. But for sure. Now, what we're going to do is hand over to the music maestro, who will do the ending music. So thank you. God bless you. Until next time.